Hi, hello. This is Jonathan Haverkampf again. Thanks for joining me. The question I received today, who is the best therapist? So we'll look into that. It's a very big question. So this is not medical or psychological advice, and copyright Christian Jonathan Haverkampf. So let's look at the question. Who is the best therapist? Well, I think we need to add two words to that, because who is the best therapist is, as such, probably doesn't make a lot of sense. It would be who is the best therapist for me, which probably makes more sense. The reason is because psychotherapy is something highly individual. I know there have been programs, computer software I think it dates back to the 70s or 60s. It was called ELIZA. If you can remember, home computers, those little bright boxes, we started out with. It was actually a 4K program, I think. So 4,000 bytes long, meaning kind of like by today's standards, that's it's less than nothing. It's nothing. And the program, essentially what it did is it didn't really understand the client. It more repeated things, like you would say, I like going to restaurants, and it would ask, how do you feel about going to restaurants? Or it would say things like that. So in other words, there was really no understanding, but it was pretty good at simulating understanding. Now, Eliza might be, a good therapist for everyone, but I haven't really seen. I think, definitely not a computer program, but also not a human being where everyone agreed this is the best in the world. There ever was, there ever will be. That probably does not exist. That's probably also why the different schools of psychotherapy, one might be inclined more to practical tools that can be used in the moment, practicing things, learning things, like CBT. Some people are more inclined towards working with the insights, so we would be talking about psychodynamic psychotherapy, or working on interpersonal level, interpersonal therapy, and several others. So the best therapist depends really on what you need, and it depends also to an extent on what the problems are. Now, a couples counselor is probably going to be better at working with a couple than a therapist who's never worked with a couple, while a therapist who never worked with a couple might be very good at working with patients with psychosis, for example, on an individual basis. So it depends on the symptoms, but there is one thing, I think, which really makes some therapists in general seem more helpful to people than others. So you might call it better. And I think that's on a communication level. Now, a lot of the symptoms we find in mental health have to do something with internal communication patterns or external communication patterns. I mean, since they are both reflective one of each other, it's usually both. So social anxiety is kind of, what am I telling myself on the inside? What's the internal communication? And then that, of course, has an impact on how I communicate externally. If I feel something is never going to work, then probably I will essentially communicate this disbelief to the outside world, and they might also not believe that it's going to work. in a nutshell. So a good communication, a good therapist will look at communication, will work with you on communication patterns between you and the therapist, and that of course reflects also on the internal communication, kind of which, as we said, mirrors the external one, and the external one, the internal one. So a good therapist should be someone where you feel the person has empathy, understands me, gets me, or is working to understand me, is working to getting a sense for what I'm feeling, and what is really going on inside me. And by doing this, of course, through the journey, when the therapist does it, it makes it also easier for you to find out yourself what's going on the inside, and of course on the outside. Like if you have difficulties talking about something, or if it's difficult to say no, or that will usually come up in therapy because you're talking to another human being, you're talking to a therapist. So the therapist is essentially, you're both on a journey, and the therapist should have certain tools apply to external and internal communication, to external communication, and should come, of course, with an openness, empathy, acceptance, all the things that are important, that make you feel better just by working with the therapist. At the same time, of course, it should go somewhere. So therapy is about change. So someone where you feel comfortable about making changes, or learning about changes, becoming aware of things that can be changed, and maybe in which way they can be changed. So there is no one size fits all. There's many things in life. Very often I suggest to clients to try more than one therapist, to just get a little bit of a comparison, and then work with the one where you feel most comfortable. And I think that is something. One might ask the question, okay, how do we know? How do I know where I feel most comfortable? Well, I think with a good therapist you should get the sense it's like a gut feeling, even if that maybe has been difficult for you, or is something that is actually an issue. But having, I think it's also important to rely on that feeling. Even if you feel I can't really rely on myself or my feelings at this point, I think very often if people really deep down find something, you look at that, they usually find that part of them that can give them the answer. Is a good therapist for me, and rely on that feeling. But there are many also more objective criteria. Is the therapist listening to me, working towards understanding, which is important in therapy, not putting any pressure on me, not saying I have to work with that therapist or anything like that, which of course would be highly unprofessional, and would even tell you, maybe look at someone else also and see what is better for you. Good therapists will usually suggest that. So I hope that answers the question, at least to some extent. So there is not one best therapist, a good therapist for everyone. It's highly individual. But the more therapists you've seen, and it just means going there for one session, it doesn't mean spending years in therapy. It should be it's a service. While of course you're working with someone who should be also deeply interested in what's going on, and should be very, very helpful, and someone who makes you feel comfortable in a therapeutic setting. But at the same time, I think it is also something where you should be able to expect something from. So if nothing changes, if you feel I'm essentially just talking or listening and nothing changes, the first thing I would suggest is talking to the therapist, saying, okay, what's the plan? and or just talking about it. And a good therapist will usually, if he or she senses that you're not getting further on your path towards recovery, and not just recovery, I mean your life is improving, then usually the therapist would start talking about the therapy and seeing if something can be improved. And a good therapist would also, if it seems that the therapist cannot really be so helpful to that specific client, the therapist would suggest maybe also just trying a couple of sessions with someone else, or refer you, or suggest something else. So the best therapist will probably recognize that there are many good therapists out there, and I think that's a hallmark trait of a good therapist. Okay, so I hope maybe this answered some of your question. If it didn't, let me know. If you have any other questions, please mention them below here, and I would be very, very happy to make a video on answering your question. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day and a great week, and see you soon. Bye bye.